Welcome to Cathedral Talk, a podcast about architecture and Minecraft, where we converse to save Notre-Dame. So, Zack.
Tom.
Yeah, so Zack, you remember how we made a whole joke about you need to give me your address? Hey, Zack, could I get your address?
It's 12345 Main Street, Anytown, Square State, United States.
It was literally going to be my question. I was like, so Zack, are you enjoying David's Christmas present?
By the time people listen to this, hopefully he is.
In less humiliating news, I did read some of the books that my father-in-law gave me. So
Less humiliating.
less humiliating.
What did you learn, Zack? What cathedrals did you learn about? I want to know.
I assume the Linux cathedrals.
Yeah, I read the programming book.
The Linux Cathedral.
But I got another cathedral book in the mail from him as well. So now I have even more.
It's just Christmas all year round with this guy. This is great.
He's a gregarious individual, generous, and the father of my wife. So a wonderful array of compliments bestowed upon him.
Definitely.
But I still have only read one of his books.
You got a year until the next Christmas. Just like me, I have a year to get you a huge shirt.
Yeah.
Teach us one thing that you learned about a cathedral from one of these books.
I thought I was explicit that the only book that I read was the Linux book.
Yeah, Tom didn't pick up on that.
No, I did. I forgot, but I did. And I want to learn one thing about a Linux cathedral. Teach me.
A Linux cathedral. Well, it was a metaphor. In the context of this recording, David and I have just listened to the episode that we're referring to.
It's true.
We have more memory of what we actually talked about than usual.
Exactly. But I don't think Tom has listened to it.
I mean, I edited it.
It doesn't mean you listened to it.
That's true.
But it's about whether or not you spend a lot of time architecting a solution in programming, or you spend a little bit of time over a long period and then just let the architecture form naturally over time.
Oh, okay.
So this has been such a big break. I don't want to bloviate on the cathedral and the bazaar. Tom's students listen to this.
That's right. That's right.
This is going to be on your final. Oh, wait, this is like coming out in the summer.
This will come out after their final.
Yeah.
My kids take the AP Calculus test in just a week and a half, and I was like, what should we watch as a movie this year after the AP test is over? As a little celebration.
And your students were like, you just recently uploaded videos to YouTube,
that's
didn't
right.
you, Tom?
And so I was like, maybe.
Let us watch that.
Watch the video podcast of Cathedral Talk. That's right, folks. If you didn't already know, we have now uploaded our first 2 episodes from long ago in the primordial past of Cathedral Talk 1, Saving Notre-Dame, and Cathedral Talk 2, Ship of Theseus, which we have put some nifty graphics together for. Optional graphics, of course, not required, but another option.
It's required reading for Tom's students.
Okay, required.
Required.
Right.
All
right.
of this
Never
is
mind.
required.
That's right.
Over the summer. This might come out at the end of summer, but if you haven't listened to all the podcast episodes, they will be on your introductory quiz upon attending Tom's class.
Yeah. And I will point out that the intention is to put out more video versions of the past episodes that we've done at no particular speed. I'm not trying to keep myself beholden to a particular release schedule. And as a side tangent here, David, are we going to announce that we're both, well, you're a father 1.0 and I'm a father 2.0?
Mostly depends on if these baby noises come through, and I think they probably have been.
Okay. Well, in that case, we will also point that one of the reasons that, at least as far as our recordings were concerned, we took a small break because both David and I recently had more babies born. So we are dealing with a little more sleep deprivation than usual. And of course, this also affects our scheduling for recording and for video editing. But The intention is to plow on ahead.
And with that out of the bag, apologies for any random cooing noises in the background.
You wouldn't apologize for that. That's cute.
Fair enough.
The cooing is going to become the most interesting part about our podcasts going forward.
I guess maybe I should apologize to people who think I'm being a bad dad. I don't know. I'm recording a podcast with the kid in the room.
Well, it's nighttime. Mom's in bed. Kid's asleep. Your job is to make sure mom continues to sleep and kid continues to also sleep to let mom sleep.
Yeah, and the best way to do that is definitely record a podcast around it.
Is the kid awake? No? Right?
No.
Then this is fine. This is good. My kid happens to not be actually I should say this is my second kid, but my first kid's up in bed, and then my second kid is actually with mom right now. So I have the next couple hours off. So I am luckier than David. Oh, also, I will mention that if I sound a little different, it's because we all have been recovering from a very terrible cold that passed through our house a few weeks ago, and my voice still isn't quite normal.
I wasn't sure who you were including as we there for a second. That was confusing.
Oh.
Me? Am I part of your household?
You said we, and it was confusing because we usually refers to the three of us.
Yeah, right. Okay, when I said we, I meant we as in my immediate family in my house.
Loyal listeners to this podcast will remember Tom's royal use of we, encompassing amorphous groups of people.
Very amorphous.
But isn't it normal, like, when we go to the moon?
What we? Who's we?
When we go...
When we what?
When we went to the moon.
All of humanity.
All of humanity went to the moon, right?
Yeah.
That's normal. I'm not the only one that says that.
Together.
Right?
I don't...
We have not colonized Mars yet, but we will.
You and I specifically.
So we have a few updates to the renovation of Notre-Dame in Paris. As we mentioned, I believe, in the last episode, we have passed the 3rd anniversary of the fire now. And more media came out in France about the progress that they've been making. There's still so much that needs to be started over there. There's really none of the reconstruction as far as the stonework has been done yet. They're still categorizing and classifying and trying to figure out where the old stones go and locating new stones that'll go well with the old stones when they rebuild the vaults. But they've also made a lot of interesting progress, though, on a lot of the interior walls. They've done extensive cleaning. They've been, as we sort of were surmising, they have been cleaning, and the inside is going to be much brighter than it used to be. But it doesn't sound like, to my joy, it doesn't sound like they're going to be like whitewashing like I was worried like they did at Chartres. Instead, it sounds like they're just going to be cleaning it quite extensively. And that is the effect I was hoping to see. No weird false joints.
Yeah, they said that in the video they were going to be getting rid of some of the lead dust that it has accumulated, and it's the first major dusting since the 19th century. And I felt good about the fact that I haven't dusted my house in a better part of the year. So if I get that bad.
I thought you were going to say it's also since the 19th century.
Yeah, this house was dust in the 19th century.
Stardust.
Exactly.
In the reconstruction efforts, one of the things that I've been contemplating in terms of, as a reminder, they have a goal in mind of trying to get it ready to go before the Paris Olympics in 2024, but which I'll just call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
No way that's happening.
No,
it's
not going to happen.
No one seems to want to outright say that, so I'll do it.
Right.
I'll be the one to take credit.
You're not the only one, but again, you're our reporter on the scene, as Schrodinger, David. So I will allow you to be the one to make the statement on the podcast.
I think both of you took way more physics than me to realize that metaphor made no sense. Yep. One of the things I've been thinking about in terms of the restoration, though, as you're saying, they haven't actually begun the rebuilding work yet. It's all kind of been the prep work and getting things ready to go.
Kind of like Minecraft.
Yeah, seriously. Your Minecraft.
Right, my Minecraft.
One of the things I've been contemplating is the speed that they're able to do in modern day versus what it would have been if something similar happened in olden times, either for renovation, restoration, or just building in the first place. And, I think it's obvious that modern building techniques allow you to do certain things much faster. But I was also contemplating whether modern sensibilities would actually impede how quickly you could do things compared to how it would have been in the past. Mm-hmm. This is guesswork. I'm not going to claim that I know this definitively, but the fact that we know too much now means that we have to weigh a lot of different considerations than would have had to have been considered in the past. While some of that can be done with computers and such, not everything can be, and all the very particular things that they're having to think about. Whereas in the past, I'm sure a lot of it was just like, man, that's fine, let's just do that. And not necessarily having to think with the granularity that modern, bureaucracy, I guess, requires.
Well, we have mentioned on the podcast before the great restorer of Notre-Dame, Viollet-le-Duc, and he was in the mid-19th century, spurred on, of course, by Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre-Dame novel. The public became happy with restoring Notre-Dame again rather than wanting to tear it down. But there was a lot more freedom back then. Your intuition, I think, is spot on, because Viollet-le-Duc did not just do a restoration of Notre Dame to its exact state, in the early 13th and 14th centuries. He did do some just completely new things that had never been done. He added a lot of new gargoyles and grotesques that in certain places that had just never been before. And he also, in particular, I've mentioned this a few times, especially when we've talked about some of the interior spaces of Notre Dame. We've mentioned the clerestory windows, the tall windows in the upper half of the nave. And at Notre Dame, there used to be these tiny little circular oculi windows with smaller clerestory windows on top. It was sort of an earlier way they used to break it up. And then in around, I think the 13th, 14th century, they decided to enlarge the windows to make more light flood into the space. But then Viollet-le-Duc comes along several centuries later, and when he's doing this restoration, he's like, oh, there used to be those ocular windows. And he decides to just knock out some of the stained glass in some of the space around the transept clerestory windows. And he just replaces it again with sort of newly created ocular windows that are supposed to mimic what was once there. But in doing that, he destroys windows that had been in place for several centuries. And that is exactly the sort of thing that they would never, and nobody would be allowed to do with any modern restoration project of a multiple century old building, right? We're not allowed to just make big, grandiose, we're going to change this back to some other, thing, right?
Well, two things of that. First off, let me say, I think my initial tone might have come across as nostalgic for the good old days when you could just do whatever you wanted. That wasn't what my intent was at all.
No, it didn't sound like that to me.
All right.
No, I didn't. It was your fault.
Just a commentary on differences of the past to today. But then second, when you reminding me of Viollet-le-Duc, do you know how long his restoration took?
That was what was curious to me, right? Because the current timeline for this restoration is 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine this one is far more massive than that one was, but I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a guess.
That's a good question. I know it's mid-19th century, but I don't actually have exact years. Maybe I'll try to look that up while we're talking today, and I'll have an answer for you. Or if not this time, sometime soon. That's a great question. Obviously, the technology would have been very different in, the 1800s. And of course, he is also the person who built the spire that we were all familiar with that then was destroyed in the fire, even though there was a previous spire that was shorter and stubbier in the same spot before it, but it was falling down, so they took it down and then put up Viollet-le-Duc's spire.
One article I'm seeing says Viollet-le-Duc invented modern restoration. So that might be kind of an interesting transition point.
Episode dedicated just to him.
I think you're right. He would be a great focal point to do a future episode on.
Well, I was saying a transition point of the old do whatever you want and modern, more limited restoration stuff.
Well, from what I remember, again, hearing from what I've watched and read, I think when people say he's sort of one of the great fathers of modern restoration projects, I guess the ideas before, like what you would do with an old building when you were supposedly restoring it, is you wouldn't really be restoring it per se. You would often just try to fix it up and make it functional for the needs of the present day. Whereas Viollet-le-Duc took it from the approach at Notre-Dame, at least, of saying we want to retroactively transform this building into something of the past, which was sort of a new way of thinking about things.
All right, so I'm seeing that the commissioning of the restoration was in 1842, and I think I saw that it started a couple of years after that in earnest, and then it finished in 1864. So we're talking 22 years.
Yeah. Actually, when I just went to Wikipedia just now, they also now have a little timeline for Notre-Dame. I should have thought of this earlier. Just go to Notre-Dame and see its timeline. And this says, 1844 to 1864, major restoration by Jean-Baptiste Lesueur and Eugene Viollet-le-Duc.
So 5 years would be a lot faster than that.
Yeah, now, of course, again, technology. One other thing that has come to light recently in the restoration efforts, I think the biggest news that's made the headlines the most is that they're currently building the extensive scaffolding under the crossing where the nave meets the transept. And the extensive scaffolding down there is going to be what's going to be in place to help build the new spire and the new vault for the new crossing. And in order to build all that scaffolding, it's supposed to hold many, many tons of weight as they, go through this process. They had to check the floor to make sure that the floor was capable of withstanding all that weight as they go through this new phase. And so then they had to dig up the floor tiles. And then, of course, when they dug up the floor, they discovered a sarcophagus in the floor. And everybody got super excited, especially the archaeologists. And I, as of the recording of this podcast, from what I know, I don't think they've opened the sarcophagus yet. I think they're slowly, cautiously trying to decide how to treat it appropriately and respectfully. And I think they sent in like a little camera just to take some pictures on the inside, and they found some like dead plants and some other matter in there. But they also found like lots of artwork that had been buried in the floor. And I think they also found pieces of the rood screen, which is the old way they used to partition the interior spaces of cathedrals. It sounds a little strange to us in modern day, but they used to take old cathedrals and really break them up into almost different sections so that they would keep the clergy isolated from the normal
riffraff.
The riffraff. And, at one point, probably somewhere in, the Enlightenment or somewhere in there, somebody said, hey, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't completely isolate the different populations. But there used to be this screen that would basically break off the different sections of the cathedral, and that was buried in the floor too, or at least parts of it were. So lots of new discoveries being unearthed. So
why didn't they take those little felt things that you put on the bottom of your furniture to prevent scratching the floor if they were so worried about damaging it?
Oh, it wasn't that they were worried about damaging the floor. They were worried that the floor would cave in.
I had to remove those things from my dining room chairs because they kept sliding off, and then the adhesive would get onto my hardwood floor and then leave adhesive residue, ultimately worse than the scratches that I was supposedly preventing. So that's why they didn't do that.
It didn't adhere your chair to the floor?
No, the little felt thing came off, and then the adhesive got everywhere. It was gross.
It was a little gross.
Yeah, and then the chair sticks to the floor.
It's not double-sided adhesive.
Because the adhesive is on the floor.
Well, no, it's just sticky. Well, it's not that kind of... It's sticky in one direction, not the direction I want it to be.
One-sided stickiness. This is such a weird concept.
That's what regular Scotch tape is.
Well, it's double-sided sticky on one side of the plastic, and then there's no sticky on the other side of the plastic.
Yeah.
I think I've lost something.
Your stickiness.
My patience.
What I was going to say about the archaeological finds is that connecting that back to the previous topic of timeline, I think it's interesting that they are having to make decisions about what to prioritize.
Yeah.
Do we want to spend more time on these amazing archaeological finds, or do we want to get moving along with the restoration? I think the video we watched said something about how the archaeologists were given one extension, but they weren't being given any more.
Yeah, they were giving us another one.
Yeah. So balancing these competing demands for so many different intellectual exercises.
Right. The archaeologists are definitely not the same people as the actual restorers. These are different groups of people that are all competing for the same space. So in the end, like I'm sure the restoration project will ultimately dictate how much time the archaeologists get, but I think it's a question of now, where do they move the sarcophagus? Do they put it somewhere else? They may already have by now, actually. I'm not sure. I'll have to check again.
You don't think it's a load-bearing sarcophagus?
But then also, do they return it, after they've done whatever, research? Because it is the remains of a person who was buried, supposedly with honor.
Yeah, because that's relevant to whether we care about researching them or not.
Well, I think I read a quote from one archaeologist who said, we have to remember that the sarcophagus is not an artifact. It is, should not be treated as an artifact. It should be treated with respect.
So I totally get that, but would that archaeologist be as blasé, like, well, this person was buried in dishonor, so we don't care?
Well, it is a question like, how far back does a archaeological find have to go in time before like the human remains are not really, we're not worried about that anymore,
Neanderthals.
When does it start being archaeology and cease being grave robbing?
Yes, exactly.
1994.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There's your answer.
That was we asked so many questions on this podcast and finally an answer. It's only been 18 episodes. Finally an answer.
But I am excited because I do expect to see more work accelerate. And again, the good news to me was that in particular, hearing that they are cleaning the inside, which I'm happy with. But again, I got no indication that there was an intention to go crazy like they did at Chart and repaint the interior.
I just think there's not enough time.
Well, that, but also, there were lots of other reasons, like the organist said.
Yeah,
and, I in a lot of ways, I'm expecting it'll be similar probably to the interior of our Washington National Cathedral, which is cleaner, brighter, because it's just so much newer.
Is it brighter? I feel like that's a pretty dark cathedral, too.
It's harder to judge because, again, as a modern cathedral built only in the last 100 years, that it has so much artificial lighting inside that it's a little bit hard to judge how much of the light is natural and how much of it's artificial. But it's got so much stained glass that it's like the National Cathedral here in D.C. has probably more stained glass than most medieval cathedrals because it was never bombed out in world wars, whereas a lot of the medieval cathedrals usually have some stained glass in their large windows, but then other windows are just white windows because that original glass was lost a long time ago. And the effect is that you get a mixture of some brighter light and some color light, and that plays with the ambience of the space.
Yeah, and National Cathedral being all stained glass, that definitely darkens it.
It darkens it, exactly. But it's also beautiful. So, yeah. We'll talk about the National Cathedral sometime, too. I'm looking forward to that episode.
Oh, we have.
Mm-hmm. Oh, but so much more to say.
Woodrow Wilson. That's what's more to say.
All right. Let's go to New York City. Who wants to go to New York City?
Is the pandemic over?
Sure. Yeah, let's say it's over.
Okay, then yeah, I'll go.
Yeah.
Oh man, we're going to get tagged on Spotify for true facts on COVID.
Oh no.
Are we on Spotify?
That's where I listen to it.
We are on Spotify. Yeah.
Oh,
you listen to it on Spotify and not on.
Well, I don't actually listen to it when it's released. I listen to it before it's edited, but I download it on Spotify.
Okay, there we go.
I actually download it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so we have one fewer listener than you think we do.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, two, because I told my wife to listen to it. Well, it was actually funny. My wife was just perusing Spotify the other night, and I couldn't believe it. She said, "Oh my goodness, look at what popped up on my recommendeds list," and there, front and center, was Cathedral Talk, and I was like, "This is magical. How did you get a recommendation for a Cathedral Talk?"
I thought you just said that she already subscribed to it.
No, she hadn't. She's not on Spotify. She had subscribed to it, I think, on Apple. So this was unrelated. So my question is Apple talking to Spotify and giving, sharing information on, common things that you would want to watch, or are they just watching the IP address here and realizing that something's going on with Cathedral Talk, so maybe other occupants of our house should also listen to Cathedral Talk? Or, if it really was a genuine recommendation.
Nope, I can promise you it wasn't that one. Not based on what I know about your wife's interests.
Oh, man, I can't laugh. I'm going to cough. Okay.
What's in New York City?
All right, let's go to New York City. We are going to take a look today at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, which is a church that was built, again, also in the mid-19th century, so actually somewhat contemporary to the work that Viollet-le-Duc was doing at Notre-Dame. But this is, of course, in the United States, and this was a cathedral being built from the ground up. It is a Gothic revival building, generally buildings that were built hundreds of years later after the Gothic age in the Middle Ages. They wouldn't be said they're true Gothic. They're usually referred to as Gothic revival or Neo-Gothic, I think mostly just to differentiate the different periods of time. But there's also some large differences that we're going to talk today about St. Patrick's Cathedral versus Gothic architecture. But first of all, I'm curious, have either of you ever seen St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City before?
Yeah, I played Spider-Man on my PS5.
That would be one way.
My web swung around it. It was fun.
Oh, actually, that's right. You took me there. Now I remember. I said, take me to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and you did it. That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was fun. That was fun.
Get a web swing around it.
Zach, you had a hard time in episode 1. Remember, you've been to the Empire State Building, so I'm going to guess that you don't have any recollection if you've ever been to St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Yeah, I can't say that I remember having been there, but who knows?
Yeah,
I'm looking where it is. It's in Midtown East. I may have been in Midtown East.
It's definitely it's pretty central. You know, it's not, you know, on the outskirts of New York City in any way. It's pretty easy to get to.
You'd have to truly walk past it though to see it though, right? Because skyscrapers are going to block it from everywhere.
Yeah,
more than half a block away.
I think, you know, we've talked from time to time about how certain cathedrals suffer with the modern encroachment of skyscrapers and very anachronistic buildings that are taking up the sort of surrounding cityscape around them. And St. Patrick's Cathedral is one of those cathedrals that is just so overwhelmed by so many New York City skyscrapers that it looks intentional. That it looks like, yeah, we just intentioned for this, we're not even trying to sort of compromise. And it's sort of in that way, I almost just sort of am at peace with it and I'm fine with it. As opposed to some other ones that are just sort of well, it feels kind of modern and we tried to negotiate, you know? Kind of like at Cologne or at St. Paul's.
You associate New York City, at least I do, with modernity and skyscrapers. Whereas you don't associate some of those other cities that you described with modernity and skyscrapers. So
that's true.
You think about them as more cultural heritage and you want to preserve their cultural heritage in a way that I don't have that sort of association with New York at all.
Yeah. As much as London wants to be like New York City, I don't think of London as New York City at all with tons of skyscrapers.
Right. London is an interesting half example. London, I think, is half old-timey, half modern.
Yeah.
And St. Paul's kind of fits in that, where you can see St. Paul's a little bit from certain places, but for the most part, it's pretty overwhelmed too.
It's a bit detached, but it's like they slowly they're moving in on it, an inch at a time. Those skyscrapers are just getting a little bit closer year by year to St. Paul's, and it's just, you know, it's getting bad. It's getting bad. But yeah, again, St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City is just completely dwarfed by all the glass structures surrounding it. And you're just sort of like, okay, it definitely makes the cathedral look way smaller than it actually is. It's not a huge one. If you compare its dimensions to Notre-Dame or to a lot of our cathedrals here, if you compare it to our Washington National Cathedral or other places, it's a relatively smaller one. It's not as long as Notre-Dame. Its nave height is exactly the same height as Notre-Dame's. And again, Notre-Dame is a high nave, but there's some differences there, which we'll talk about soon too. But in general, it is a relatively small, large cathedral, if that makes sense.
Zach and I both gave faces.
Mm-hmm. One of the things about St. Patrick's Cathedral is that it was built on a budget. And if you look at its timelines of construction, it is surprising how quickly it was built. It had a groundbreaking in 1858. And of course, this was right before the Civil War. So just 2 years in, they had to halt construction around 1860 when the Civil War broke out. And then construction did not resume until 1866. But then the main portion of the building was completed in 1878, 20 years after its groundbreaking in 1858. The only exception that was still left to be finished were the spires themselves on the facade at the front, and those took another 10 years and were finished in 1888. But overall, we're talking, 30 years from the very start to the very end. And that is very fast as far as any Gothic construction goes.
I mean, that's as long as Notre-Dame's restoration.
Yeah.
That we just said, which is very contemporary.
It's very contemporary to Notre-Dame's restoration. And, I mean, also to put things in comparison, again, we'll talk more in the future about Washington National Cathedral, but Washington National Cathedral, which is also a Gothic revival church and is considerably larger, it took 83 years to build. That was built from 1907 to 1990. So again, if you compare this, 30 years for St. Patrick's in New York City and 83 years in Washington, that's a big difference.
How much time do you think was carved off by not sleeping?
By not sleeping?
I mean, half, right? Nighttime?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did they not sleep back then?
I mean, no one in New York City sleeps.
City that never sleeps.
Oh, you're talking... Okay, I see what you're saying there. I'm following you now. I was a little slow, but I get it. A few other interesting things about the construction is that unlike most cathedrals that we know that were built out of limestone, the outside of St. Patrick's is actually clad in marble. That is expensive stuff. It's probably one of the most expensive stones out there.
Was it expensive because it's rare or it's because it's heavy or both?
So I want to do another episode. Sorry, Zach. Another question that I'm not going to answer.
1994.
I want to have a topic episode where we talk about different kinds of stones and building materials. And in fact, if I am lucky enough, I might get a
field trip.
I might get a specialist to give us some data points to discuss sometime in the future. I might have a contact or two with a mason. So I would like to have that topic in the future. But from what I know, marble is actually, I don't know if subset is the right word, but marble is like a specialized kind of limestone.
Yeah.
It actually, there's some kind of, again, this might not be quite right, but there's some kind of like crystallization process or some kind of compression process that basically transforms your general run-of-the-mill limestone into an even more fancy, ornate marble. And the marble that they got, again, it was debated. They weren't sure if they were going to use it at first. They thought about using granite as one other option when they built it at first, but they said, no, we want that beautiful white exterior. And they went for it, and it is beautiful on the outside, but it did come with a cost. And the cost is that they ran out of money. They didn't have enough money to finish it. And instead, the inside is not made out of stone. At St. Patrick's Cathedral, the inside is primarily made out of plaster and a wood faux vaulted ceiling. The ceiling is supposed to look like it's made out of limestone, but it's actually not at all. It's made out of plaster and wood. And it is so light that St. Patrick's Cathedral does not even need or have flying buttresses. And I noticed this one day when I was looking at some aerial shots of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I was like, something's missing. And I was like, there are no flying buttresses. How is that possible? And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, the roof is only made of wood. There's no stone up there at all. And then it said, oh, the ceiling is so much lighter, they didn't need flying buttresses. And so there you have it.
So other than the fact that it was constructed well after the medieval period in Europe, is the lack of flying buttresses what disqualifies it from being Gothic in your mind?
That is definitely a central part of my feelings, yeah. But there's more to it than that. But that's definitely a significant part.
When we went over the aspects of what makes Gothic, what other parts are missing from St. Patrick's Cathedral other than flying buttresses?
Well, I was sort of thinking about this, just, it's so strange to think of like the entire vaulted interior being made of wood and plaster. And then I thought to myself, what if what happened to Notre-Dame on April 15th, 2019 also happened at St. Patrick's? What would happen? And I'm pretty darn sure if what happened at Notre-Dame also happened at St. Patrick's, a fire, there just would be no St. Patrick's. St. Patrick's would have gotten obliterated because it doesn't have a stone vault. We all know now, we were all scared at the time because it looked catastrophic. And again, Notre-Dame severely damaged, but David, I remember your first impression the day after the fire at Notre-Dame was, it actually looks a lot better in there than I expected it to. When you saw the damaged interior of Notre-Dame, and we saw that while some of the vaults fell in, especially underneath where the spire was, most of the vaults were intact at Notre-Dame, and they survived that crazy blaze, and they deflected all of the falling timbers that were burning from falling into the nave and catching the rest of the space on fire. So the Gothic vault was designed to do exactly that. Gothic structures, in addition to their, height and light, they were designed to survive fire. And I think when you take away that principal aspect of, it's no longer made out of stone, it's made out of other stuff, that really removes it from the playbook of Gothic.
Well, so I missed a detail there. You kept saying the vaulting of Gothic cathedrals. What vaulting is missing from St. Patrick's?
It's the material, not the presence or absence.
Right. The material. There's actually a terrific New York Times article that we'll link in our show notes that goes over a recent restoration that was done at St. Patrick's. And if you go through some of the details on the ceiling, which again is called vaulting in a cathedral, it's supposed to look like stone, but the sort of ribs of the vaults are, I think, supposed to be primarily plaster, and the webbing, that's sort of the space that connects the different ribs of the vaults, is also plastered wood. And you can see sort of what it looked like before versus what it looked like after this restoration. If you compare what this vault looks like to a true Gothic vault that's made out of stone, you can see that the webbing space in particular is pretty different.
So what I'm learning from this is I always kind of thought of Gothic as primarily aesthetic in nature. I understand there were structural things that came about that led to the Gothic style, but you're implying here that it's aesthetics is actually maybe less of a thing, and it's much more the way the building is put together.
Well,
I mean, I would say equal parts in both ways. Go ahead, Zack.
I've just re-listened to episode 9 of Height and Light, and I can't find anything in this entire episode that I've listened to in the course of this recording where we're talking about the necessity of the building material as being part of Gothic architecture.
Yeah. I was kind of...
Well, that's probably a failing on my part, but can I just say that, Zack, you're going back and listening to the podcast again. You're warming my heart.
I think Tom didn't pick up on the sarcasm once again.
Wait. Oh, he didn't.
I have listened to episode 9.
Oh, okay.
That's how I knew.
It was just a year ago or whatever that was.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yeah, I wasn't actually listening to the podcast while we're recording. That would be kind of bizarre.
No, I thought that you said that you did recently, but I guess I never mind.
Although you do mention how we mentioned earlier in this podcast where you were afraid that they were going to do the same whitewashing to Notre Dame that they did in Rouen or whatever. And that one of the things that you like about Gothic cathedrals is the way that they prominently display limestone. So I am saving you from my own criticism of you, which is you have...
I feel so saved right now.
I know, right? You have extolled the virtues of limestone several times in previous episodes. Never before did you link it.
Yes.
So critically to Gothicness, it just in the past was just how much you loved it.
To the definition.
Right. I think I probably should retcon some of those earlier episodes and say that in the Height and Light episode, when we said, what are the principles of Gothic technology? Again, pointed arches, flying buttresses, vaulted ceilings, and then all to make grand spaces for big clerestory windows with lots of stained glass. That was all under the playbook of, we want to build the thing out of stone. We want to build the thing out of stone because we want the cathedral to be eternal. We want the cathedral to last forever, and it needs to be immune to fire. most of the cathedrals in Europe are now standing on the place of defunct cathedrals that were once there before them that just happened to burn down in a fire.
Were they stone or wooden?
So a lot of the cathedrals that were before the Gothic cathedrals might have been Romanesque cathedrals, and there might have been plenty of stone in those constructions, but the big difference is that most of them didn't have big stone vaulted ceilings. Most of them had wooden ceilings that were also very heavy, but then when they would burn, they would come crashing down and bring down most of the building with it. So by transforming the ceilings into these stone vaulted ceilings for Gothic architecture, you had a barrier that would protect the main part of the structure. And if the wooden roof above it that was protecting it from, rain and the elements did burn, it would burn off basically like we saw in 2019. It would burn off and fall off the sides and leave the interior mostly intact.
So let's transition to this alternate universe where we had added to Gothic architecture this requirement that it is eternal.
Right.
Do you need to use stone? In medieval times, perhaps you did need to use stone. Could you do a modern, truly Gothic design with steel? Aluminum.
This is still the Middle Ages, but we have access to steel?
No. In the Middle Ages, you had to use stone to accomplish that new requirement of this has to last for a long time.
Yeah.
Move forward 400 years.
Yeah.
You want to check off every single box that makes something Gothic.
Yeah.
Is one of the checkboxes stone? Or is stone just the way that medieval architects were checking off the box for this needs to last for a long time?
So from the medieval architects' perspective, who are called master builders, they didn't actually call them architects back then.
That's a Lego term.
Can you make a Gothic cathedral out of Lego is Zach's question.
Could you make a Gothic cathedral out of Lego? This is what everyone wants to know.
So as
answer
we also,
the question, Thomas.
I'm working on it. As we've also discussed, and as you sort of discovered, Zach, these cathedrals were not called Gothic cathedrals until the Renaissance, right? Remember when we had that brief debate where I thought it was maybe the Middle Ages and they called it Gothic. I was wrong. Mm-hmm. You were right. It wasn't until the Renaissance that the word Gothic got applied as a critique to the style. Mm-hmm. In the Middle Ages, stone was the material of choice because it was the most durable and the most eternal that they had available. And with all styles, there's a time period. I would say that there's a time period based on the technology that's available and then what artistic style comes out of that material. And once you transition into other materials like steel and glass and so forth, you can accomplish a lot of those other goals, height and light, but the nature in which you accomplish those goals is very different. And again, since we talked earlier that some of the principal innovations of Gothic are pointed arches, flying buttresses, and vaulted ceilings, and stained glass, many of those elements become obsolete and no longer needed with modern technology. So the Gothic is just the historian's way of referring to these different periods of time and how to refer to the architecture of that Middle Age period.
So you're saying Gothic is, we have a definition of like what makes something Gothic, but it really is primarily referring to a period of history of this building style when it was what you could do with the materials that they had. If so, that would be, the metaphor in my head would be, in music terms, classical music means technically the period of, let me get this right. I think it's like
don't
luck
fall
with
into
that
this hole because there is contemporary classical music being
I'm going to get to that. No. I know that's exactly where I'm taking this. I think the technical definition of classical music, I think it's about 1680 to like 1840, something like that.
Yeah.
Give or take a few decades.
Right.
But you can make quote, quote, classical music today on your computer, on software.
Yeah.
Which obviously wouldn't have existed in that period. And we would recognize it in the classical style, but it's not what most people would refer to as truly classical because it doesn't actually come from that period. I don't know if that's a perfect metaphor or not, but I think
it's a perfect point of comparison because I think there is classical music that is being composed today that could confuse people about the period in which it was produced.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I like the comparison too. I think it's a great way to probe my own thinking on, how do I qualify something as Gothic or not? Again, the general colloquial way of sort of making these distinctions, like I said earlier, St. Patrick's is called Gothic Revival or Neo-Gothic.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering if Neo-Gothic was a term of art, because that's what I was going to use.
Yeah, and it's basically just the way of saying this is in homage to the medieval times in which these things used to be built like this. The technology has gone way beyond the need to do it this way, but people like how things ended up with Gothic architecture that they want to mimic it and even follow some of the basic principles, even if they're old. And I think, again, it's okay to have something that uses all the same techniques, but to still give it a different name, because I do think time periods are important. They add a lot of context.
Sure.
But it's not just a time period. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I want to add to it. I don't think it's just the time periods that change it from being Gothic to Neo-Gothic. I think the intentions also make a significant difference, even if they're not reflected in the finished artifact itself. Because, as you said, if the intentions of Gothic architecture is like, well, we've just got a bunch of this stone around, how are we going to make bigger and brighter cathedrals? We're going to innovate using pointed arches, vaulted ceilings, flying buttresses, right? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
You can take all of those implementation details about I want flying buttresses, I want pointed arches, I want vaulted ceilings, but your intentions could be, I want to romanticize this period of history in such a way that may not have actually existed when that history happened in reality. And so your intentions for making a Neo-Gothic cathedral using the same design principles can lead you to something different than if your design principles were constrained by the technology.
Sure. Well, I don't want to go down this tangent too much, but I think this is a great time to at least bring this up a little bit to make, again, a comparison between the Gothic style and other styles that are not Gothic, but maybe still use similar techniques and the same building materials or similar building materials. Again, I want to do a whole episode on this church sometime, so we're not going to go down this rabbit hole. There's a famous church, which was on our top 20 list of places to visit in episode 1.
Chichen Itza.
No. There's a church in...
Forbidden Palace.
Nope.
Eiffel Tower. Eiffel Tower definitely seems like it's trying to be Gothic, yeah.
Leaning Tower of Pisa.
No.
Burj Khalifa.
Nope.
Are you happy I remembered so much from episode 1?
Your eyes are darting back and forth.
I'm not looking at it.
You're not looking at it?
I'm not looking at it.
All right. I literally just put up the video episode like a few weeks ago. You can be watching the video episode right now.
I'm not watching it right now, but I watched it recently. You got me. You got me. I didn't remember from our recording. I remember from the video that all of Tom's students should go watch on YouTube right now. Episode 1 of Cathedral Talk on YouTube.
That's right.
Well, you didn't actually say what it was.
No, I didn't.
We're going to guess. We're going through every single one of them. He said it's in the set of 12.
The set of 20.
20.
Same thing.
They both have 2s in them.
For very large values of 12 and very small values of 20.
Stupid math people.
Well, if you go through that list, only so many of them are churches. There really aren't that many churches left on that list.
I don't have it in front of me. I don't remember what it's called. We recorded that 2 years ago.
Someone didn't watch the newly uploaded video.
I clicked through to give the YouTube algorithm make it thought I watched it.
YouTube algorithm knows you skipped through. Now we know, too.
I know it does.
Your dirty secret is out.
There's a church in Barcelona, Spain, the Sagrada Familia.
Ah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, built by the architect Antoni Gaudí. Pull yourself together, Zach.
I got Zach on that one.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
The reason I just wanted to bring this up briefly, and again, this is such an amazing building that's worth not even just one, but probably a few episodes in the future. But the main reason I wanted to bring this up now, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona is a building built out of stone. And in fact, originally it was being built by an architect who I don't even remember the name of before the main architect Gaudí. It was intended to be another Gothic revival building with a lot of the same techniques, pointed arches, vaulted ceilings, and so forth. But then Gaudí came along, took over the project very early into its construction, and completely reworked everything. Still same kinds of similar, building materials, lots of stone, not so much limestone, but I think a lot of sandstone, if I remember this right, and some brickwork too, just because of what was available. But again, definitely more faithful to the same kind of materials you'd find in a Gothic church than St. Patrick's does with all its wood and plaster. But the Sagrada Familia does not use flying buttresses, and it really doesn't have pointed arches either. It is a church built entirely of catenary curves. And a catenary curve is the arch that you get from a hanging rope or chain when you connect it from one post to another, and then you flip it upside down. The reason that the shape is a great building shape is that it's very stable. All the points along the chain are at equilibrium. All the forces are balanced throughout it. And if you just invert it upside down to make an arch, that balanced equilibrium will still be balanced, just in the opposite direction. And Gaudí used that as a very new shape and a very new style to build the whole building out of. The Gothic pointed arch is nowhere to be found, really, in that building, at least not that I can recall. And the Gothic pointed arch is, a very different technique. It was trying to accomplish the same thing, but it was a very different earlier technique for doing that. And so these are buildings that can be divided into different camps. And so I'm bringing this up saying that, it's not just about the stone. The stone is a vital part of it, but again, the style of, the arches, the pointed arches, and the flying buttresses, these are all things that help you categorize the type of style that applies to Notre-Dame and all the others.
This church that Gaudí created, and you're saying its style is not Gothic. What style did Gaudí make his church? Is it gaudy?
Oh, I saw it coming. I didn't know where it was going.
Right at you.
I don't know if we've officially given it. Again, we're going to do a whole episode on this.
We?
Yes, we are going to do an episode.
All the people on the moon.
No. You said we. If we've officially given it a classification.
Humanity, David. Humanity.
I don't know if everyone on the moon.
Humanity has... I will look that up, Zach. I will come up back with another answer for you.
Oh, no. No, you're seriously taking my joke. Oh, no.
Maybe somebody needs to start making a list every time I say, I will look that up for you and get back to you. Because I feel like I've said that a lot recently.
At least you say I will look it up and not we will look it up.
That's true.
We should give that task to our editor.
We should. We
producer
should.
Yeah,
definitely.
We should. Tom, do you want to tell our editor and producer to go look this up?
I'll leave a memo.
So in terms of, to put one more hypothetical to you.
Sure.
If tomorrow I went out, raised the money to build a new Gothic cathedral in my backyard.
Yep.
And let's say I
hope you have a big backyard.
Big backyard.
Let's just assume I do.
Okay.
I do not, but let's say I did.
Okay.
And I followed the...
And I hope you don't have zoning problems.
The zoning board loves me. We followed the exact same plans. We followed the exact same plans as they did back in 1400s, whatever. Mm-hmm. Same building styles, all limestone, flying buttresses, pointed arches, the whole works.
Yep.
Built in that style. Would that be a Gothic cathedral because it was built in the 2000s?
I think most people would call that Neo-Gothic.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, again, that's Neo-Gothic because you've tried to be as faithful as you can to the style, but again, Gothic is a way of referring not only to the style but the time period as well. But people again disagree on everything, and I am perfectly at peace with some people, maybe even myself, saying, sure, it's a Gothic cathedral. I'll call the Washington National Cathedral a Gothic cathedral, even though officially it's Neo-Gothic, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's all just ways of categorizing stuff.
I think that's fine, and in some ways I think appropriate too, because it's not going to be in the definition of a Gothic cathedral, but one thing that I would be able to take, even if I built it exactly the same way, one thing I'd be able to take advantage of today is modern shipping.
Oh yeah.
Which they wouldn't have had back then, which isn't
Oh Oh, yeah.
That's not going to be in any definition of a Gothic cathedral, but it's definitely an intrinsic part of how they built the thing. And so that reminds me of what we talked about a little bit in the last episode too, of the medieval castle that they've been building for 20 years someplace in Europe. I forget where. Whenever that's done, I just refer to it as a medieval castle, but even that feels a little wrong because you hear the term medieval castle, you assume like, okay, this has been around for several hundred years. So you are misrepresenting it if you call it that.
Yeah.
Neo-medieval or whatever, like, that tells you the name exists for a reason. The name is supposed to convey certain information to you. And you've enlightened me a little bit more in terms of what the full term Gothic cathedral is supposed to convey. And it is also supposed to convey a period of time.
Exactly.
I wonder if you took a master builder from medieval times and brought them to 2022 and you said, all right, here's modern architecture. Get yourself familiarized with modern building design and constraints. How would you make a church with modern construction practices?
Yeah.
I don't think it would look like the churches that they were making.
No.
And so I think a modern cathedral with Gothic sensibilities and modern construction would look probably a lot more like the large churches that exist out in the US West.
Yeah.
Which are, ornate to some degree, maybe not in the gargoyle or the grotesques, or what you called them, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the gargoyles are the ones that are used for spouts for water, and grotesques are often mistaken for gargoyles, but grotesques are just crazy statues of stone, usually monster looking, that are not used for any kind of practical water remediation purpose.
But I don't necessarily mean these big box structures, but some of these large churches out here have these massive, almost office building style glass facades on them that let in a ton of light. And I'm not necessarily referring to like the stadium churches, and those exist as well. And they have their own particular rationale behind those that I think is perfectly reasonable to get a larger congregation in there as possible. But if you're trying to go for a ton of light pouring into your church, I think you would want, if you're following that same sensibility, to have almost an entirely glass structure if you could pull that off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It speaks to, like you're getting at what is the goal of the architect, the master builder, what the constraints that they're working with. As we called that episode Height and Light for a reason. Those were the two goals they were going for. They didn't care intrinsically about flying buttresses, pointed arches, stone. Those three things just happened to be the thing that let them get the height and light that they wanted.
And the eternalness.
And survivability.
Yeah.
Whereas, if height, light, survivability is what you care about today, if you bring the same goals with modern limitations, like Zack says, going to look massively different.
Taking it back to St. Patrick's just one last time here in New York City, I'm glad that David brought up the point, the difference between Gothic and Neo-Gothic and how we would anything built exactly the same style, but in the modern day with the same materials, we call it Neo-Gothic. I honestly have issues with even calling St. Patrick's Neo-Gothic.
Oh boy.
I don't think
we just got us all settled and happy.
Well, you see, I
bow on it and everything.
I because it is such a deviation from
such a deviation.
It's such a deviation to not use any stone on the interior and the ceiling. I think I would at least like to call it budget Neo-Gothic because it was built to cut so many corners that it completely changes the nature of the building. There's a quote here. They said that some of the plaster was coming down off the ceiling that you could just grab it with your hand like mush. And it's so blasphemous. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going for.
Not in the religious context, just in Tom's sensibility context.
Exactly. What other contexts are there?
And don't get me wrong, New York City, I think St. Patrick's Cathedral is quite beautiful, but you got a plaster cathedral.
It's just a travesty. It's beautiful, but a travesty.
You love the marble exterior, you just hate the rotten inside.
That's a metaphor for something. I don't know what. Zach, come up with it. What's
Rotten apple or something.
I was hoping something a little bit more controversial than that, but sure, rotten apple.
America?
No. You guys grew up in New York.
Oh.
Not the city.
The Big Apple? Anyone?
I wasn't trying to riff on New York City. I think New York City's cool. I was trying to say New York City's rotten from the inside out. That's mean.
Zach, how could you say such a thing about New York City?
Yeah, that's blasphemous.
Come fight me, New York City. All of you.
Mountain Man Zack, up there in Denver, Colorado.
All we of you.
All we of you.
That's it for now. Check out our podcast website at cathedraltalk.fm. There you will find many architectural visuals and Minecraft goodies. If you would like to support our efforts here at Cathedral Talk to aid in the restoration of Notre-Dame, please use the direct link on our website to donate to friendsofnotredamedeparis.org. Friends of Notre Dame is a non-profit organization that is leading the international fundraising efforts to rebuild and restore Notre Dame Cathedral. By donating to them through the link at cathedraltalk.fm, we'll know that our podcast is reaching new patrons. As our own Minecraft project progresses, we'll be sure to share plans, screenshots, and videos for your own visual palette. Good day and happy building.